Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
A few years ago, I had to spend a night alone in a large, isolated house in the middle of nowhere. My friend had rented it for a weekend getaway, but I ended up staying behind for personal reasons. The house was far off the beaten path, surrounded by a thick forest that seemed to absorb every sound. The sun had just set, and as darkness crept over the land, the isolation became more pronounced. My phone's signal was weak, and I wasn't expecting anyone to come around until morning. I had made myself dinner and was trying to relax on the couch when I started hearing faint scratching noises from upstairs. At first, I thought it was the house settling, as old houses tend to creak, but the sound persisted, deliberate and slow, almost like someone was dragging their nails along the wooden floor above me. My heart rate quickened. I was alone in the house, or so I thought. I called out, asking if anyone was upstairs, but there was no reply. I reluctantly stood up, my feet heavy as I made my way to the stairs. The scratching was louder now, almost frantic. I turned on the lights, trying to muster the courage to investigate. The house was eerily silent, except for the noises from above. Every creak of the floorboards under my feet felt like an intrusion, as if the house itself was watching me. As I reached the top of the stairs, the scratching stopped abruptly. I felt a cold chill run down my spine, and I froze for a moment. I glanced down the hallway. The house had several bedrooms, and one of the doors was slightly ajar. The air smelled stale, and it felt oppressive. I stepped forward, my hand gripping the railing for support. When I reached the door, I hesitated. The room inside was pitch black. I tried to shake off the growing feeling of dread, but the stillness made everything worse. I could hear my own breath in the silence, but the fear was suffocating. I entered the room, and the door swung shut behind me with a soft thud. I turned on the light. Nothing was there, no sign of anything unusual, yet the feeling didn't leave. I searched the room, nothing but the bare furnishings. But then, just as I was about to leave, I noticed something odd on the floor, a series of small, deep gouges in the hardwood. My breath hitched, the scratches from earlier, the same pattern. But who or what could have made those? I quickly retreated to the hallway, but the air felt wrong, thick with an unseen presence. It was only then I realized how dark the house had become. The windows were completely black, like something was blocking out the light. My phone was dead now, no signal, nothing. I bolted downstairs, locking every door I could find, trying to keep my mind focused. But then the noise began again, this time from below, deep in the basement. I tried not to listen, but it was as if the house was alive, responding to my fear. The scratching grew louder, closer, until I could hear it directly beneath me. I couldn't stand it anymore. My legs shook as I ran to the door, but the moment I turned the handle, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, heart pounding, but no one was there. I made it outside into the pitch black night, the cold air rushing over me as I rushed to my car. I drove off, not looking back until I was miles away. The house still stands there, empty. The scratching, though, never stopped. The locals say it was abandoned long before I stayed there. No one can explain the noises, but they all agree. The house is not just old, it's something else entirely, something much darker.
Story number 2.
A friend of mine, let's call him Daniel, told me a terrifying experience he had during his time in college. One weekend, he and a group of friends decided to go on a road trip to a remote cabin they'd rented for a few days. It was one of those secluded places in the mountains, far from civilization. They arrived late at night, just in time for a heavy rainstorm to roll in. The cabin had an eerie atmosphere, but they brushed it off, ready to unwind after the long drive. The first night was uneventful, but on the second, things took a strange turn. After dinner, they gathered around the fireplace, talking and playing games. The wind howled outside and the rain pelted the roof, but something about the house felt off. The walls creaked, the floorboards groaned. It wasn't the storm. It was like something was moving within the house itself. Around midnight, Daniel went upstairs to grab something from his bag. As he was walking down the hallway to the bedroom, he noticed a faint flickering light coming from the end of the hall, where an old, abandoned room was located. The door to the room was cracked open. His curiosity got the best of him, and he slowly walked toward it. As he peered inside, he could see nothing but shadows and an odd dim glow coming from an object in the corner. When Daniel stepped closer, the door creaked open all the way, and he froze. In the middle of the room was an old wooden rocking chair that moved back and forth on its own. The glow was coming from a lamp beside it, but the lamp's light wasn't steady. It flickered unnaturally, as if it was responding to the movement of the chair. As his eyes adjusted, he saw something else, a figure just barely visible in the corner of the room. It was sitting on the floor, back hunched, head down. Daniel's heart raced. The chair stopped moving, and the figure slowly raised its head to look at him. For a moment, there was complete silence. The figure's face was completely obscured, hidden beneath a hood or some kind of dark cloth. But the eyes, they were glowing, an unnatural, piercing red. A cold chill ran down Daniel's spine. Before he could make a sound or turn to leave, the figure whispered something barely audible. The voice was soft, almost mocking, but it felt like it was coming from right next to him, even though the figure was still across the room. Leave, before it's too late. Daniel backed away slowly, unable to take his eyes off the figure. As he moved toward the door, the rocking chair began moving again, this time faster, almost violently. He turned and bolted down the hallway, heart racing, breath short. He didn't stop until he was downstairs with the rest of his friends. He tried to explain what had happened, but no one believed him. They thought he had imagined it or was just scared of the storm. But the next morning, when they were packing to leave, they noticed something strange. There was a thick layer of dust in the abandoned room upstairs, but right in the center, in the same spot where Daniel had seen the figure, there were footprints. Not just any footprints, wet, muddy footprints, as if someone had been walking around in the room, leaving a trail of dirt. The scariest part? The prints led directly to the rocking chair. Daniel never went back to that cabin, and the group of friends stayed as far away as possible from anything even remotely similar. To this day, he says he can still hear that voice sometimes, calling to him in the dark, "Leave before it's too late."
Story number 3.
A few years ago, a woman named Emma moved into a small historic apartment in a quiet part of the city. It was the perfect space for her, charming, affordable, and conveniently close to work. The apartment complex itself was old, built in the early 1900s, with a rich history that intrigued her. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The first night she spent there, she woke up at exactly 3 a.m., feeling a cold draft. The window was closed, yet the chill seemed to be coming from inside the room. She got out of bed and checked the apartment, but everything seemed fine. The air conditioner was off, no windows were open, and nothing unusual was out of place. Trying to brush it off as just an odd coincidence, she went back to bed. But the feeling didn't go away. The next few nights were the same. She would wake up at 3 a.m., feeling that cold breeze, despite the apartment being warm and secure. It was like something was intentionally disturbing her rest. One evening, Emma decided to do some research on the history of the apartment building, hoping it would help ease her mind. She visited the local library and found old newspapers and records about the building. As she flipped through the pages, she stumbled across a chilling article from the 1920s. The piece was about a woman who had lived in the very same apartment she was now renting. The woman had been found dead in her bedroom, a victim of an apparent suicide. The article mentioned that she had been an artist, and she had reportedly complained of strange occurrences in the apartment before her tragic death. Her artwork had become increasingly dark and disturbing in the months leading up to her death, filled with haunting images of eyes, shadows, and cold winds. Emma's heart sank as she read on. The most unsettling part of the article was the note that the woman had written before she died. At 3 a.m., it comes, and it doesn't leave. Emma's mind raced as she connected the dots. That was exactly the time she'd been waking up every night. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Emma began to set up a camera in her room, hoping to capture whatever was causing the disturbance. The following night, at exactly 3 a.m., the camera recorded strange movements in the room. A shadow flickered across the wall, even though no one was there. The cold draft seemed to swirl around the room. though the air itself remained still. Terrified, Emma tried to leave the apartment, but the door wouldn't open. It was as if the building itself was holding her in place. Desperate, she grabbed her phone and tried to call for help, but there was no signal. She was trapped. In a panic, she ran to the window, but the moment she opened it, a loud voice whispered in her ear. It wasn't just a whisper, it was like a deep, guttural growl, as if something was right behind her. "Leave, now," it hissed. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she turned around, but there was nothing there, just the cold air swirling and the feeling of something watching her. She slammed the window shut, and in that instant, the door to the apartment flew open with a violent bang. Emma didn't hesitate. She grabbed her belongings, ran down the stairs, and out into the street, never looking back. She never returned to that apartment, and to this day, the building remains unoccupied. Some say it's because of the strange occurrences that still plague it. Others believe it's because of the ghost of the artist, still haunting the halls, waiting for the next person who dares to live there past 3 a.m.
Story number 4.
A couple of years ago, a man named Jack was driving across the country to visit his family for the holidays. He was on a long stretch of highway in a desolate part of the country when his car broke down. It was late at night, the road empty for miles in either direction. No streetlights, no signs of civilization. The only light was the dim glow of his car's dashboard, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Jack tried everything to restart the car, but it was no use. His phone had no signal, and he knew he couldn't stay in the car all night. So, with a sigh, he decided to walk to the nearest town, hoping to find a mechanic or at least some help. It was cold, the wind biting at his skin as he walked along the shoulder of the road. After what felt like hours of walking, he saw a faint light in the distance, a small building. As he got closer, he realized it was an old diner, run down but still standing. Jack hesitated, but decided it was worth checking out. It seemed to be the only sign of life for miles. He pushed open the door and was greeted by a bell that rang with an eerie chime. The diner was dark, save for a flickering neon light in the corner. The place was empty, but the smell of greasy food hung in the air. Behind the counter was an elderly woman, hunched over, wiping the counter with a rag. She looked up at Jack as he entered, her eyes cold and unblinking. "You look lost," she said in a low, raspy voice. Jack nodded. "My car broke down. Can I use your phone to call for help?" The woman didn't respond right away. Instead, she just stared at him for a long moment, her wrinkled face expressionless. Finally, she reached under the counter and slid a small old-fashioned phone across to him. He took it gratefully, but when he tried to dial, he realized the phone wasn't even connected to a line. It was just a prop, an old phone with no wires. Ma'am," Jack said, confused. "This phone doesn't work." The woman's eyes never left him. "The phone works, just not for you." A chill ran through Jack, but before he could respond, the lights in the diner flickered again and the door swung open. A man walked in, tall and gaunt, wearing a worn leather jacket. His face was pale and his eyes seemed too wide, too hollow. He didn't say a word, but just stood there in the doorway, staring at Jack. Jack took an uneasy step back, but the woman spoke again. "He's here for you, just like the others." The man took a step forward and Jack's heart began to race. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice shaking. But before the woman could answer, the man reached out with a hand that looked almost skeletal. He didn't touch Jack, but somehow it felt like the very air around him was being sucked away. The diner grew colder and the walls seemed to close in on him. His vision blurred and he staggered back, clutching his chest. The woman's voice echoed in his mind. "He'll take you now, just like all the others who came this way." Jack turned and bolted for the door, but as soon as his hand touched the handle, it wouldn't budge. The door was locked. The man was now standing directly behind him, his presence overwhelming, suffocating. Jack spun around, but the man was gone. The woman was gone too. Everything in the diner was still. The lights, the smell of food, the furniture, all frozen in place. Jack's heart was pounding as he ran to the window, but when he looked outside, he saw only darkness. No road, no cars, no signs of life. It was as if the diner was floating in an empty void. Desperate, Jack pounded on the door, screaming for help, but no one came. The silence pressed in on him, and he realized something horrifying. The man and the woman were not from this world. They were just echoes, waiting to trap anyone foolish enough to wander too far down this road. The door finally opened on its own, and Jack ran out into the night, never looking back. When he reached his car, he found it was mysteriously repaired, as if it had never broken down. The strange diner was gone, swallowed up by the dark, and there was no sign it had ever been there. Jack still drives down that highway sometimes, but he never stops. He knows that some places are meant to be forgotten. Some roads should never be traveled, and some diners should never be entered.